Hi, welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther, and today I'm going to talk about the 12 pieces of advice I want to give to new gardeners, to beginning gardeners. I was a beginning gardener myself only a year ago, and I feel like having had that recent experience, I can tell you the things that I found the most useful and beneficial in my garden that I want to pass along, or that I would even potentially, if I could go back in time, reinforce for myself to do. Some of these things are not hugely revolutionary, but I feel like the fresh experience I have can be useful to you. So I hope this is helpful. Let's go. All right. 1, and I experienced this myself. Grow what you love, what you eat, what your family loves, what you know how to cook. If you don't know how to cook it, but you know you love it, that's okay too. But grow what you like. For example, I love tomatoes. Now, I did buy 3 different varieties of tomatoes I've never had before, but as a general category, I know I like tomatoes, so I bought them. I grew them. And the reason being is it's okay to experiment, to have a couple plants of other things, but if you grow a huge patch of something you don't know if you like, or you think, oh, I'll give it another try, and then you taste it and you realize you don't like it, then you don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You don't get to bite into that succulent thing you could have had instead that just would have made you so happy when you ate the fresh taste that tastes nothing like it comes from the grocery store and you experience it anew. You want to enjoy that. And so try growing things you like. And like I said, it's okay to branch out, but as a beginning gardener, you're starting off with scratch anyway, so why not grow what you like? All right, number 2. And this is harder if you're new to your location, but know where the sunlight falls. Know what things around your garden cast shadows and when. And this actually changes throughout the year. The way that the sun sets and comes up is different throughout the year, and so therefore the sun shines in different parts during different times of the day of your garden, of your property. And so knowing where the sun is and for how many hours is really important. Now, I will say if you're new to your location, like I was fairly new last year, and I hadn't taken the time to observe when we first moved in the prior year to that, I will say that try to find a space that's very open, that doesn't have any tall structures like buildings, like very, very tall buildings or tall trees or anything that hangs over that area, and you might have a better chance of success of having enough sun for what your needs are. But I really strongly recommend, even in your first year, paying a really good attention to where the sun is. I ended up actually relocating one of my gardens halfway through spring that was going to be my tomato garden in the backyard when I realized that big tree overhead cast a lot more shadow a lot earlier and for a lot longer than I thought. And those tomatoes were not going to get their 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So that bed had to go to the front yard. All right. Number 3. I don't want to discourage you with this one, but I'm going to say you need a lot more plants than you think to grow the amount of food you're envisioning growing. Okay? And the reason this is important is because it's about expectations, and it's also about plans. When I started gardening, I had this dream of having so many tomatoes that I would just, like the pictures I see of others on Facebook groups, of gardening groups, like these bushels and bushels of tomatoes that I could then can. And the reality was I had enough tomatoes to do maybe 2 quarts or 2 liters, I don't know, two big jars, right? 2 big jars. Out of all the tomatoes I grew, and I grew like 7 or 8 tomato plants, which for me, that's a lot of garden space because I have a tiny garden. You know, I was able to enjoy those tomatoes on a regular basis, eat them on a regular basis, and yes, I could have not eaten them fresh and frozen them and been able to can more, but then what's the value of eating something fresh is so great. So I just want to give you the idea that many plants, while things like tomatoes produce a lot, there are also plants that produce a lot less. And so having the expectation of enjoying your food fresh and knowing you can potentially can some or preserve some is great, but you're not going to be doing it at the scale, at a small garden as a new gardener that you could otherwise. But there is one thing that you can preserve and not take up a huge amount of garden space, and that's herbs. You can plant thyme, basil, you can plant rosemary. They all preserve very well, although basil, it does an okay job preserving. And chamomile even, or things like that. And then you can have little jars of happiness all winter long like I have. Like I've been having mint tea from my garden from the spring and summer, and it makes me happy all winter long. So there are things you can preserve, but just be aware that the garden, it takes a lot more plants than you think to produce the amount of food you're expecting. And no, I don't have an answer to exactly how many you need for your family because I myself am figuring it out. So I apologize for that. Number 4. This is something I heard from the Epic Gardening channel, and Eric Espiritu, I think is his name, and he mentioned that along with knowing where the sun falls, also be aware of what direction the shadows are cast. And the reason for that is you want to plant plants by height in order from the tallest on the end where the shadow is cast to the shortest, because you don't want a tomato plant casting a shadow over your beans. Then you can't grow because they're not getting enough sunlight. If you put the beans on the other side of the tomato plants where they will get sunlight, and the tomato plants will still get sunlight because they're taller, then you're good to go. So when you're planning out where you're going to put your garden, think about where the sun is and how it casts shadows, and plant the plants that are smallest, closest to the source of the sun, and the furthest away from the tall ones that cast shadows. It just will help your garden do better. And that was one tip that I used, and I'm really glad I did. And the reason I put this on my list is actually because last night I was planning out my garden and I started putting things willy-nilly, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I can't put the string beans on one side and have arugula on the other side that won't get any sun. So make sure you think about that. Number 5. This is just a recommendation. Try to plan your garden or plan your space based on or ensure that you have easy access to water for your location. You're a lot more likely to water your garden if all it takes is to pull out the hose and carry it over to the garden and spray it, right? Or you can get aggregate drip irrigation, which I'm not going to do because I have a hose and I'm fine with that. But so what happened was, where this recommendation comes from, is in the spring of last year, I had my spring crops and I had a shorter hose that was maybe like 25 feet, and it didn't quite reach all the crops, all the parts of the garden. So I had to get my watering cans, and I had to haul my heavy 5-gallon watering cans out, or 2-gallon watering cans, but they felt like 5 gallons, out to the garden. And then, it took so many hauls and so much time. And if you're in a rush or you're tired or whatever, you're less likely to want to water and take good care of your garden. So invest in those longer hoses. Think about location-wise, and think about access to water. It's just, it'll make your life a lot easier if you plan around that. And your plants will thank you for it too. Number 6, visit your garden regularly. Sometimes you can't. A lot of people have day jobs, and pre-COVID, that would have been my case as well. But even then, try to visit the garden at night or early morning before you go and see the dew on the leaves. Try to visit your garden. And the reason why is, what was the phrase that people say? Like, the best tended garden is the one that you can see like the path that the gardener has made by walking through it, right? The best tended garden is the one that is visited often. You will see when weeds are growing or something is choking out your plants. You'll see when plants are starting to have disease issues or pest problems. You'll see how the plants are developing. It's just so useful. And also, really, being in the garden is just so calming and so nice. So it's also good for your mind. The next thing I'm going to say, and this is sort of a little bit controversial maybe, or maybe just like take it as a measure of whatever, but handle your plants. We're so used to, and I'm talking about not when you plant them, but like once they're growing. The way to know whether a tomato is ripe is partly by color, but also partly by feel. I have this batch of delicious green zebra tomatoes, but really they're pretty much green with a tiny bit of yellow when they start turning, but you really have to be up close to see the yellow. And you don't want to harvest those tomatoes when they're super soft and super yellow because they'll be mushy and mealy. But if you get them right when they start to turn soft and a tiny bit of yellow, they're just perfect for on sandwiches. And the only way to know the difference between a hard tomato and a tiny bit slightly softer tomato that's just about ready to pick is by touching it all the time. Now, you don't want to manhandle, you don't want to cause bruises, you don't want to, destroy your plants, but touch the leaves, feel what they're like. Be tactily involved with your garden beyond just pulling weeds. And there's just so much joy in it. And this might be something everybody does, but then some people kind of think of the garden kind of like a painting where you can't touch it. Well, you can touch it now. So do it, enjoy it, feel it, taste it. Number 8, timing, seasons. Fundamentally, this is when you're planning what you're going to plant when. I'm going to break it down for you real quick. There are 2 types of plants, and this doesn't include perennials, native plants. This is talking about vegetables primarily. There are 2 types, and herbs. 2 types. 1, cool weather, the ones that can handle cold temperatures, slightly freezing frosts. Not necessarily deep freezes, some can handle just a little bit. And then warm weather vegetables is the second one. Cool weather vegetables are things like arugula and peas and spinach and cilantro. Those kinds of things thrive in cool weather, slightly just a little bit mild, occasional warmer temperatures. But the minute it gets hot, they're going to go to seed and they're going to be nasty tasting. But you can harvest them. You can plant them again in the fall, in the late summer for a fall crop. And so knowing whether it's a cool weather plant or a summertime hot weather plant is very helpful, because you definitely don't want to be planting spinach in the middle of the summer or cilantro in a sunny place in the middle of the summer. It is just not going to thrive. It is probably going to die or taste very nasty. And then there's things like tomatoes that are a warm weather plant. They need temperatures in, I think at nighttime, at least in the 50s, right, to be safe, and for them to be happy. And peppers, I think they need temperatures in the 60s so at night. So like, know those things, and it can really help you plan out your garden. And it also means that you can have a cool weather crop like radishes, and then pull that up and plant green beans there. And you can have both a cool weather crop and a warm weather crop in the same garden, and put your soil to use year round, or minus the winter. You can have some in winter too. Number 9, leave space for pollinators. There's this thing called beneficial insects and pests, non-beneficial insects. And there's plenty of, in addition to pollinating your plants, there's plenty of pest protection benefit that pollinators provide. But also, a healthy garden is one where you're seeing where you're seeing bees and hornets and wasps and flies and all kinds of things. Well, maybe less flies, but where you're seeing the beneficial insects buzzing around. That is the sign of a healthy garden, and you want that. You want a healthy ecosystem, and also having some flowers around that your pollinators will come to before they come and pollinate the rest of your plants. Having some flowers around is so pretty. So tuck some flowers in between your vegetables and herbs. It just makes for, when you're waiting for that produce to show up, it makes for a nice thing to see. Number 10. This one's a hard one, but it's important. Be prepared to fail. It's going to happen. When I came into gardening, I said to myself, I'd heard this from someone else. And I said to myself, okay, my expectation is I want to get some greens in the spring, like some lettuce or arugula, and I want to have tomatoes. Now, I'm going to grow a lot more than that, and I'm going to hope for success. But if I can just get some tomatoes and some lettuce in the spring and some tomatoes in the summer, I'm going to be happy. And I'm going to learn from the process. And the reality is, even the most seasoned gardeners have failures. They have big failures sometimes. It just happens. Nature has her way. And despite all of our efforts and all of our knowledge, there's always more to be learned. And so by coming in with a lower expectation, but hope, of course, you want to be hopeful that your garden will succeed, then if you do hit a speed bump, you're much less likely to go, oh, screw it, I'm going to give up gardening forever. I can't make it work. No. Learn, enjoy, have lower expectations with hope, of course, but yeah, some things aren't going to work. Some things are going to fail. And that's another reason why you should have a greater variety of plants and vegetables if you can, because having diversity means, just like with stocks, when you own the stock market, having a diverse portfolio means that you're less likely to lose everything. Okay, although sometimes you can't help that. All right. Number 11, pests happen. I can't tell you how many times on gardening groups I see people freaking out when they see a pest in the garden. They're going to be there. And it's okay to freak out because you're new and you're learning. So that's totally fine. And ask people about what to do. But you don't need to necessarily think it's the end of the world. A lot of times plant pests come in, the beneficial insects come in and get rid of them. Or sometimes, like the tomato hornworm, I was able to go out at night and get them with my fluorescent flashlight and keep my tomatoes safe. So there are things you can do to help keep the pest population in check, and sometimes you won't succeed. Sometimes they will take over parts of your garden and destroy it. But it's gonna happen. And don't feel like you need to be Mr. Rabbit on Winnie the Pooh going around with your pesticide or whatever. And I'm not gonna make a statement on whether you should or shouldn't use pesticides. That's 100% up to you. I prefer not to, but I'm still learning, so I may change my mind down the road. But try to just understand. You're gonna see bugs. You may not like them, but they're gonna be there. And they're actually part of a natural ecosystem. And I will say the last thing, it's sort of a two-parter thing. One of them is a shameless plug for trying out winter sowing. I will say that the most useful thing I did this year for my garden, this last year for my garden, was doing winter sowing. I had seedlings ready. It saved me money from having to buy a bunch of plants from the box store. And it's just such an easy process. I'm going to have a link to my Winter Sowing 101 series where I talk about everything you need to know about winter sowing. So please at least check out the first video where I talk about what it is and why you should try it. The other thing that was really changeful or beneficial to me was trying out the raised bed square foot garden. You know, when you're moving into a new property, you don't know what's been done to the land. You don't know what chemicals are there. And also digging into it isn't quite that easy sometimes. And using Mel Bartholomew's square foot garden method, and there's plenty of books, there's groups on it, there's just all kinds of great stuff out there, resources out there, really was helpful to me. It's especially beneficial if you have a smaller garden space and you need to cram as much as you can into that space. His method teaches you how to use that space for its full benefit. So check it out. Check out the spacing requirements and the recommendations for soil mixtures and other things, and it'll really help you. All right. So if you're still listening, if you're still tuned in to this, thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please hit the like button. My like button. And tell me what you think. Are there any questions I didn't answer, or any things you think I got wrong, or recommendations you would add on for new gardeners? And yeah, if you aren't already a subscriber, please consider doing so. And I'll throw one other thing in. I just hit 300 subscribers, and it's only been 8 days since I hit 200. So thank you to all my new subscribers, and to everyone who sticks around and has been commenting and making my gardening life so much more fun. So thank you. I really, really enjoy being part of this community and everything you bring on your end to contributing to this experience. And I hope I'm helping you as well. All right. See you next time.